MashaAllah, brother. MashaAllah. For a legal salawat. We are here to commemorate the great sacrifice of Maulana Hussain Salam, his loyal companion and his family members. On Shahadat of Maulana Hussain and his companions and the hardships which is faced by our Sayyida Zainab Salamullah Alaiha and other daughter of Rasulullah, our heartiest condolences to our Imam of time, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, and all our of Ahlul Bayt, especially Mu'mineen of Saskatoon, for Muhammad wa Ahlul Bayt Muhammad Salawat. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali. चिश्मा है जिसके फैज का जारी किधर गया, चिश्मा है जिसके फैज का जारी किधर गया, पुश्ते नबी थी जिसकी सवारी किधर गया, नोके सना पे जिसने सुनाया कलमाए हक, कुरान ढूंढता है वो कारी किधर गया, पर मोहम्मद वाले बात मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु I would like my brother Nadir Shah to recite Salam, brother Nadir Shah, by Muhammad wa ala Muhammad Salawat.
برای خوشنودی ارواح طیبین شهدای کربلا خصوصا ابا عبدالله حسین علیه السلام صلوات دیگر. اللهم صل علی محمد. برای خوشنودی قلب لطیفی امام الزمان عجل الله تعالی فرجه الشریف، برای تعجیل در فرج ولی عصر ارواح و صلوات دیگر. اللهم صل علی محمد و آل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم صل على محمد وآله. وفاطم لو خلت الحسين مجددا، وفاطم لو خلت الحسين مجددا، وقد مات عطشانا بشق فرات، وفاطم لو خلت الحسين مجددا، وقد مات عطشانا بشق فرات، إذا التمت الخد نجوم السماوات بأرض فلات قبور ببطن النهر من جنب كربلاء معرس فيها بشتى فرات توفوا عطاشا بالعراء فليتني توفيت فيهم قبل حين وفاتي إلى الله أشكو نوعة عند ذكرهم سقتني بكأس تكلي والفدعات إذا فخروا يوما أتوا بمحمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
إذا فخروا يوما أتوا بمحمد وجبريل والقرآن وسوراته وعدوا عليا ذا المناقب والعلا وفاطمة الزهراء وخير بناته وحمزة والعباس والدين والتقي وجعفرها تيار في الحجبات صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
شباب يا أخي محرم استواسي الزكي بقية الله الأعظم إمام الزمان عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف روحي وروح العالمين لا قدمي لا قدمي هذا خداوند تبارک و تعالی این تعاضی و این مصیبت ها مجلس ادعاها و سینه‌جنی ها را از همه مؤمنین و مؤمنات قبول مرحمت بفرماید به برکت صلوات علی محمد و آل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
سيد الإمام عليه الصلاة والسلام بار الله رهبر بار الله رهبر اسلامیان کی خواهد آمد شیعیان را غمگسار مهربان کی خواهد آمد بار الله رهبر اسلامیان کی خواهد آمد شیعیان را غمگسار مهربان کی خواهد آمد انتظار مصلحی دارد جانم ما نداند انتظار مصلحی دارد جانم ما نداند مصلحی کل رهنمای انس و جان کی خواهد آمد خستگان عشق را ایام درمان خواهد آمد خستگان عشق را ایام درمان خواهد آمد غم خور آخر طبیبی دردمندان خواهد آمد آنقدر از کردگار خویشتن امیدوارم که شفا بخش دل امیدوارم خواهد آمد دردمندان مستمندان بی پناهان را بگویید دردمندان مستضعفان بی پناهان را بگویید منجی عالم پناهی بی پناهان خواهد آمد صبر کن یا فاطمه صبر کن یا فاطمه ای بانوی پهلو شکسته صبر کن ای فاطمه ای بانوی پهلو شکسته مهدیت با شیشه دارو درمان خواهد آمد مهدیت با شیشه دارو درمان خواهد آمد آقا جان به خدا دل ما برایت تنگ شده امام الزمان برای شیعیان جهان ما همه جا تنگ شده است دارد برای شیعیان هر جا تو سری میزند چون که ما آقا و مولای نداریم مولای ما از ما دور است امام الزمان یا صاحب الزمان به ظهورت شتاب کن عالم ز دست رفت پا در رکاب کن دیده در هجر تو شرمنده احسانم کرد بس که شبها گوهری عشق به دامانم کرد شمعی از گل روی تو به بلبل گفتم این تنک حوصله رسوای گلستانم کرد این تنک حوصله رسوای گلستانم کرد شمعی از غم هجران تو گفتم باشم آنقدر صبح که از گفته پشیمانم کرد صلی الله علیک یا صاحب الزمان اجرک الله یا بقیت الله الاعظم عظم الله اجورنا و اجورکم بمثابنا ابا عبدالله الحسین علیه السلام اللهم اكشف هذه الأمة هذه الأمة بحضوره وعجل لنا ظهوره إنهم يرونه بعيد ونراه قريب يا رب الحسين وحب الحسين اشفي صدر الحسين بظهور الحجة ببركة الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد
اللهم صل على محمد
MashaAllah, brother Nader. MashaAllah, bari digar salawat.
Allahumma
Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Today's Tabarak is sponsored by Brother Imdad Ali, Brother Sakal, Vikas Hashmi, Brother Nader Shah, Father Marhumin, Surah Fatiha, Ma'as Salawat. Salli ala Muhammad, Ali. Muhammad wa Nabi Muhammad salawat. Salli ala Muhammad, Ali. Now I would like to invite Hujjatul Islam Muslimin Maulana Saleem Bhimji to recite Majlis tonight, and after Majlis we have a question answer session. You can ask questions. Par Muhammad wa Nabi Muhammad salawat.
Muhammad sallallahu. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين والفداء وعجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولا دائمة ولا علائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So this evening we're going to keep it a bit light. It's not going to be the traditional majlis that we've been doing for the last 10 nights. The topic that we're asked to speak about, and we're going to make it a bit more interactive. So if you have thoughts that come up in your mind as I'm speaking, just jot them down. We'll have time at the end of the session for questions for both from the sisters upstairs, either with a microphone or they can maybe text them in or send them or on a piece of paper, whatever way. And also for the brothers down here. Is the topic really was about what happened after Karbala, right? We all know the day after Karbala, Sham al-Ghariba, the 11th, the 12th, when the family were transported from Karbala to Kufa. Eventually from Kufa, they went to Sham. And then we know there is a discrepancy for Arba'in. Did it even happen? There's debates about Arba'in. Did it happen the same year? Did it happen the year later? These are all controversies which none of our scholars have been able to resolve. But my goal is not to look at those individual events. I want to look at the big picture of the community, the Muslim Ummah, after the event of Karbala. What actually transpired after this tragedy in the grand scheme, not related specifically to this tragedy. So one of the things that we know is that after Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was killed in the Masjid of Kufa, we know that the Banu Umayyah again launched a campaign. I talked about it briefly, for them to re-establish, or not re-establish, but solidify their government. Because although the first Muawiyah and the family were stationed up in Syria, and we know that Imam Ali, once he took on the Khilafat, he moves the base from Medina to Kufa. There's even rationale why did he move to Kufa. Many people wonder that the Muslim territory was Mecca, Medina. The first three so-called Khulafa ruled in Medina. Why would Imam Ali move thousands of kilometers to present-day Iraq to govern when Mecca, Medina were the focal points of the community? But whatever the case may be, is that we know after his martyrdom, Imam Ali obviously bequeaths the imamate on the orders of Allah to his eldest, Imam Hassan alayhi salam. At that time, Muawiyah, obviously there is this, I won't even call it a power struggle because Imam Hassan was never after power, but Muawiyah saw that as an opportunity, obviously, to solidify his reign and the reign of his family over the Muslim community. Based on politics, as we mentioned on the third or fourth night, Banu Umayyah had a strong, vehement hatred against Banu Hashim, And obviously, we know that there had to be a peace treaty signed between Imam Hassan alayhi salam and Muawiyah, Lanatullah alayh. It was for the benefit of the Ummah. It wasn't that Imam Hassan alayhi salam was weaker than his brother Abu Abdullah. By far, that's not the case. But the situation demanded, because of the lack of followers, because of other reasons, for there to be a level of protection of the Ummah and the community. Imam Hassan had to do that treaty. And we know that one of the things in that treaty was that Muawiyah guaranteed, he promised that when he died, he would not appoint his son or anybody to govern over to be the Khalifa. And we know that he went back on that because his son Yazid Lanatullah alayh took over, right? And that is why Karbala eventually happened. Interestingly enough, that this man Yazid ibn Muawiyah, he only lives 3 years and a few months after the tragedy of Karbala. He was a young man as it was. There's no clear indication how old he was when he was born. Obviously, we know for a fact that historical narratives of that era of 1400 years ago are very incomplete to an extent, right? Even if you look at the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, for some of the 14 Masumin, we know their birth dates for sure. Others are a division, there's difference of opinion. Even the birth of Rasulullah, majority opinion of the Shia is 17th of Rabiul Awwal, but people like the late Sheikh Al-Kulayni, the compiler of Al-Kafi, he believed the 12th of Rabiul Awwal, which is the Sunni opinion. So even in the dates of the Shahadats and Waladat of the Ahlul Bayt, there are obviously different dates. Now you look at it from other events, like, for example, the other individuals, we have very little in hand to actually conclusively say that we know for sure that this, and this actually happened. But we know based on some historical narratives that, for example, with Yazid, his reign, his khilafat, if you want to call it that, began on the 15th of Rajab in the year 60 after the Hijrah. That's when his father died. That is when that transfer of power took place, and we know that he was killed, or he died around the 14th of Rabiul Awwal in the year 64 after the Hijrah. So really, again, as I said, only about 4 years and a few months he actually reigned. And in his 4-year reign of tyranny, there are actually 3 major events that took place. Obviously, the one that we have marked tonight, or that we marked over these last nights, the tragedy of Karbala. That was in the year 61 after the Hijrah. That set off this massive chain of events. But there were 2 other important events. One of them that takes place about 1.5 years later, or 2 years later, which is called the attack of Hara, which was his attack, and I'll mention that in Medina. And then the year after that, where he attacks and destroys the Kaaba in the year 64, and then shortly after he leaves this world. So Karbala was really the stepping stone, I would say, his initiation into tyranny. And maybe it was also a good opportunity for him to be able to test the waters. How far could he push the envelope of his politics before the Muslims would revolt against him? Because, if you look at the track record of the Banu Umayyah, when the 3 Khulafa were in power, when they put Muawiyah into office, they knew what was happening. A lot of the Muslims, especially in the Muslim territories of the Hijaz and maybe even to an extent Syria, although we know that area of Sham had been, people there had been brainwashed, I would say, to the realities of Islam. So Banu Umayyah were able to push the envelope as far as they wanted to. They recognized, the evils of Muawiyah, but many of them obviously turned a blind eye to it. Many people were just, in Islam because of the fame, the popularity, the power, the position. We have examples even in our world today. Presidents who take over countries and their own political party, they know the evils of that man, but because they can stay in power, they get a seat in the Senate, in the White House, they remain in their position, their job, they dare not question the president. Even though they know what he's saying and doing is not right, still they remain quiet because it would affect their political standing. So, many times people think, well, how could people allow the likes of Muawiyah or Yazid to remain in power when they saw how corrupt they were? We only have to look at recent politics in North America to recognize that people at the end of the day, what they worry about for most people is their stomachs. right? If I'm getting paid, if my stomach is full, why should I worry? Right? And that was really the situation of the so-called Muslim Ummah at the time of Banu Umayyah. You know, and I mentioned that I just have to repeat this point that keep in mind that when people like Muawiyah come into power, right, he becomes so-called Muslim at Fatah Makkah. So 13 years Islam is progressing in Mecca, 10 years in Medina. He becomes Muslim in the year, let's say 9 after the Hijrah or 8. For 21 years, him and his family are fighting against Rasulullah. They are killing, for example, Sayyid al-Shuhada Hamza and eating the liver, his mother Hind, right? So a family that has been so opposed to Islam for 21 years, how do you expect them now to convert and now be the best of followers, right? I'm not saying that you'd be perfect, no, but at least have some semblance of your Islam, right? But no, they were in it for them because they knew that it was either convert on Fatah Makkah or face the sword, right? And for them, it was a matter of political expediency. Let's convert, let's pretend to be Muslims. And so then later on, once the Prophet is out of the way, when he dies, then we can consolidate power in our family and bring it back to how it used to be. So this is unfortunately what happened. So Yazid takes over, Karbala transpires. Some of the Ummah wakes up, some of the Muslims wake up to an extent, but that even still was not enough for the Muslim community to wake up. And even till today, unfortunately, many of the majority Muslim community, if they don't love Yazid, they don't really hate Yazid too much. You have one stream within the mainstream Muslim community who will disavow Yazid, who will curse Yazid. But then you have people, for example, Al-Ghazali, very famous Sunni scholar. He's the author of a multi-volume book on Akhlaq, Ahya Ulum ad-Din. It's like 30 volumes. The whole thing is in English. And he basically comes out as saying, you know what, we can't curse Yazid. Because he says we have to give him husn adhan, give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was wrong. He did ijtihad and maybe he was wrong. As many other people have used this argument. So unfortunately, even though he had a very vicious history and track record, still the majority of Muslims will say, well, you cannot say anything bad about him because he's a companion or he's a follower, he's a tabi'een. His father, they'll say, was the katib, the writer of the wahi, of the revelation. But ultimately, you know, if we look at it, and if we're honest with ourselves, and if the Ummah at large was honest with themselves, they would recognize that if you question Yazid, then you have to question who put him into office, his father. And if you question his motives, because he's a companion of the Prophet, then you have to question who put him into office, Uthman and those before him. If you question Uthman, then you have to question his predecessor. And if you question the second Khalifa, then you have to question how he got into power, which is to the first. And if you question that, you basically, your entire religion falls like a deck of cards, like dominoes. And so in order for majority of Muslims not to go down that rabbit hole, they don't even talk about Karbala. You know, I was looking at my YouTube feed over this last week or 2 weeks since Muharram began. And I follow many different non-Shia YouTube scholars. And I swear to God, none of them even mentioned Imam Hussein in any of their sermons. It was everything else in a topic, right? But there's nothing about Karbala. Not even an acknowledgement that this is the day when Imam Hussein alayhi salam was killed. But yet they can acknowledge Day of Ashura as the day when Moses crossed over the Nile and Prophet Noah was saved from the flood and all of these other fakes. These are forgeries, but yet they can acknowledge all of that happened to the Jewish community, but they won't acknowledge what happened in the Muslim community. And unfortunately, the reality is, as I said, when you question Karbala, you have to go back to the roots. And the roots begin not even at Saqifa. That is one part of the roots. It goes right back, as I said, to Banu Umayyah and Banu Hashim. And the hatred Banu Umayyah had for Banu Hashim, which resulted in everything that we see even up until today. So after tragedy of Karbala, Yazid takes a break for a year, stops his killing machine. Maybe he was a bit tired. Maybe he had to come up with new ways to kill and destroy and plunder the Ummah. And so, as I said, in the year 63 after Hijri, so 61 was Karbala, In the year 63, he attacks the city of Mecca. There's a lot of history behind why he attacked. I don't want to go into all of that. You can probably read on that on your own. But this battle, or not even a battle, the event of Hara, which basically refers to a region of Medina. There was an area of Medina in the east of the city that is, there's a mountain range. And that mountain range was known as this area of Hara. It was an area where actually one of the major Jewish tribes used to live. And for that reason, this event is known by that title. But let me just give you a few of the facts and figures of what happened to show, because again, some people say, well, maybe he got it wrong in Karbala. He wasn't guilty. Ubaydullah did everything, right? Shimmer did it, this person, that person. And so people try to exonerate Yazid of his crimes and say that he wasn't bad. Well, look what he did, even if he didn't do this event directly, his troops were ordered to do it. So obviously he is responsible for it. The first thing that historians mention is that over 80 companions of Rasulullah were killed. 80 of the Sahaba. Whether we like companions, we have no problem. Let me say that as Shias, we have no problem with the Sahaba of Rasulullah. Those who are valid, respected, who stood with the Prophet, we have no problem with the companions. We have problem with certain people who were around the prophets, who made life for the Prophet hell. Right? And we can't say, well, like our brothers say, all the companions are decent. No, we don't say that all the companions are decent, because when you look at their track record, as individual human beings, we recognize that some had major blemishes on their character. But the history is that 80 companions of the Messenger of Allah were killed in this attack of Medina. 700 of the people who had memorized the Quran, the Bukhari of the Quran, they were slaughtered in Medina as well. 700, for no reason at all. 11,000 people in total, we are given a number in history, were killed in this attack. Thousands of women were raped, and they gave birth to children, illegitimate children. And the historians mention that women who were pregnant, their stomachs were slit open and the babies were taken out. They used the masjid of Rasulullah to keep their horses in as a stable. So the horses would urinate, defecate in the masjid of the Prophet for days upon end. They were literally given carte blanche to go into Medina and do whatever they wanted, to steal, to rape, to plunder, to kill. And Yazid had no problem with that. But yet, the Muslims of the world say, well, he was misunderstood. He was a good person. You can't call him a kafir. Well, if a man is involved in all of this, that not even our history books, we can go back to their books of history and look at all of this, and you can track all of this in the books of the non-Shia historians. This is all of the crimes that they have recorded about Yazid in this one event that he allowed to perpetuate. So even if you say he wasn't responsible for Karbala, it was Ubaydullah and Ibn Ziyad and all of these people, and obviously that's a false argument, because the day that he takes over, he sends the message to the governor of Medina to take the allegiance, the bayat, from certain key people in Medina. One of them is Abu Abdullah, and he clearly says if he doesn't give the allegiance, they take his head. He was never good to start out with. Then you go to the year 64. The next year, after he desecrates the city of Mecca, killing, raping, plundering, they attack Mecca. And again, there's a history behind why he attacked Mecca. More so, it was because there was a political movement, which was known as the Al-Zubair movement, and they were basically a challenge to the Khilafat of Yazid. There were always these so-called Khulafa, these so-called political authorities who were fighting for power, whether it's Yazid, or it's the Al Marwan or Al Zubair, all of these little groups, they were all fighting for power. Because again, for them, Islam was a way to get to the material, the power, the political goals. It wasn't a spiritual religion. It wasn't a religion sent down by Allah meant to give a better life to humanity. They were involved in it for the politics. That's as plain and simple as it can be. They lost out because the revelation came to Banu Hashim. They lost out because the family of the Prophet were given such a status in the Quran and Hadith that they could never get to that level. So what you do is you assassinate your opponents, right? It's the easiest way. It happens in many of the Middle Eastern countries, you can't win an election fair and square, so you are a target and you assassinate your political adversary. We see that unfortunately in much of the Muslim world. And they got their cues from people like Yazid because he couldn't win. He couldn't win over the hearts. And so what you do is you basically kill the people who are in your way. So he attacks the Kaaba. Now, for those who have been to Mecca, you know that on the outlying area of the Kaaba, there are mountains. Unfortunately, some of the mountains have been destroyed to make palaces of the kings and the shopping centers and that big clock tower. But initially, those were mountains because mountains surrounded Mecca. So basically, Yazid had armies stationed with catapults on top of those mountains, and they were basically shooting fireballs and what we call today cannons to attack the Kaaba, to draw out the people who were basically taking refuge in the Kaaba. Because as we all know, that the Kaaba is sacred space. When we go for Hajj or Umrah, you put the ihram on, it's even haram to kill a mosquito or a fly or the smallest, or even to pluck a flower out of the ground is not allowed. So the Kaaba and Makkah in itself has such a sanctity that nobody would go and even think of hurting a mosquito or an ant. But here is Yazid, his army setting up catapults around the Haram, around the Kaaba, and attacking the Kaaba, destroying the Kaaba, actually leveling it to the ground. And it had to be rebuilt. This is a structure that has been there for many years. Obviously, Nabi Ibrahim had built it. It had gone through, obviously, destructions and probably floods and earthquakes and many other things over the thousands of years from Prophet Adam's time to Prophet Nuh, from Nuh to Ibrahim, alayhi salam, to the time of Rasulullah. It had to be built and rebuilt, and even we know that one of the rebuildings was at the time of the prophets. But this was another attack, and the historians say that hundreds, if not thousands, of people were hurt, were killed, were badly burnt, because obviously these fireballs are being shot into the Haram, and people don't expect to be attacked in the Haram. It is a ground of sanctuary, a ground of safety. And so the same people that were actually involved in the massacre of Karbala were also involved in the attack against the Kaaba. And basically the only reason it ended was the fact that 2 weeks after the siege began is Yazid was killed or he died. And so basically that entire movement to attack and to draw those people out to kill those involved in the setting up of a shadow khilafat, a shadow government against his government. Basically, it fell apart because of the death of Yazid. Now, how did he die? There are basically 3 different ways scholars have traced to historical reference of how he died. The first one is kind of funny, actually. He used to love animals. He had a fondness for monkeys, especially. He had a fondness for dogs. He used to play with animals. He used to keep them in his company, very close to him. So they say he had a monkey, and he put his monkey dressed up on a donkey. Now it sounds like a bit of a joke or a comedy routine, but it's reality. He has a monkey. He dresses the monkey up. He puts him on the donkey. Yazid is drunk. He's riding his own donkey or riding his horse. He falls off his horse. He breaks his neck and he dies. Not a good way to die for anybody, right? Chasing a monkey on a donkey, on your horse. It just sounds pretty ridiculous. Now I can just imagine if Muslims ever made a movie about how Yazid died, it'd be a comedy, really, That's one of the ways. Others say no, he died after drinking too much alcohol. Because it's a known secret. There are even books written by the Ahlul Sunnah who have awakened and who know the truth. And they clearly said that he used to drink alcohol. They weren't, nobody is mincing their words and saying he was a good guy. No, even some of the mainstream Ahlul Sunnah scholars of history, they clearly say that he used to drink alcohol. He's even written poetry, very vile poetry against Rasulullah, that he would read, where he would say, for example, that the Banu Hashim played with this government, this mulk. There's no khabar, no wahi that came to Rasulullah. He is clearly quoted as saying this poetry. Even when the head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was brought to him on a silver platter, we've all heard that sad story. He has his stick and he's hitting the teeth of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. he says those poetry that Banu Hashim just played with his kingdom. There was no khabar, there was no wahi, or no revelation from Allah. This is all a game they concocted just to solidify power in their family. Because they wanted to take over from the Quraysh, they didn't want Banu Umayyah to play a role in history, so they made all this up. So his kufr is blatant in history. There's no doubt about it that he was not even a Muslim. Forget about it, he was a fasik, or that he was an open sinner. And others say that he basically died of pneumonia. Whatever the case may be, his rule, as I said, is only about 4 years he is given to rule. And obviously from there you have a chain of succession of Khulafa from Banu Umayyah. But I want to move into one more area before I conclude, and then we can open it up to the floor tonight, is what was happening in the rest of the Muslim Ummah. Because as I said, it wasn't people who were just remaining quiet. There was an awakening. And so we always hear that Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, his revolution in Karbala basically began to stir other revolutions. Other movements were taking form to counter Banu Umayyah. And there's one group, as you may have heard, called the Tawwabun, these repenters, the people who did Tawbah. They come about in the year 66 after the Hijrah. So about 5 years after Karbala, people from Kufa, called the Tawwabun, this Tawwabun movement, they basically gathered together. They decided, you know what? We feel guilty for what happened in Karbala, but we weren't there to support Abu Abdullah. So their form of tawbah, of repentance, was to gather and to plan and plot to dismantle the Banu Umayyah system. But unfortunately, these people of Kufa, they're the people of Kufa, people have opinions of how they are. They betrayed Imam Hussein. We heard that 20, 30,000 letters were written to Abu Abdullah when he's in Mecca. And not 30,000 people, but 30,000 letters. Some of these letters were signed by families, 4 or 5 by tribes of hundreds. So there could have been tens upon tens of thousands of people of Kufa who had pledged their support. And they, as we know, backed out. Even the Tawwabun, they initially started at about 16,000 people, but they quickly dwindled to about 3,000. So even those who wanted to do Tawbah, unfortunately, they even backed out of this movement. And there were political reasons why. There was a very notable personality that I'll talk about briefly named Mukhtar Ibn Abu Ubaid al-Thaqafi. We've all heard his name. If you don't know about it, the Islamic Republic of Iran has made a magnificent movie about Mukhtar's revolution. It's called Mukhtar Nameh. It's in Farsi originally. There's Urdu translation, there's English. I'm sure it's online on YouTube if I'm not mistaken. I have the DVD version I had purchased, but it's available online. And if you haven't seen this movie, it gives you a very detailed analysis from pre-Karbala all the way to the movement of Mukhtar. Now, obviously, although it was made in Iran, it's an Islamic movie, but keep in mind that there are a lot of facts in that movie that are not fully in line with what we believe in history. And one of the interesting things is, if you ever got a chance to see the original screening of the movie when it was being broadcast on Iranian television, and this is back in, I think, 2016 it came out, is after every episode, every weekend when it was being shown, they actually had a group of historians have a discussion to analyze that particular episode, to talk about what was positive and negative, right and wrong from the historical perspective. Those videos are probably still online, but they're only in Farsi. For those who know Farsi, you can watch them. But it's good because it gives us an insight. Because obviously any of these movies, whether it's the movie about Imam Ali or Imam Rada or this movie about Mukhtar or Prophet Yusuf, these are movies written by directors, with some intervention and some help from ulama and religious scholars and historians, but not always. I don't think they always ran an entire script by a body of experts in Islamic history. So you may find that things are not as they seem, and obviously the dialogue between, let's say, Mukhtar and his wives or whatever, are obviously all fabricated. We don't know anything about that. But nonetheless, it's still a very valuable movie to watch because they do cover major events in the movement of Mukhtar. So Mukhtar refused to join the Tawwabun. He felt that they were not adequately trained. They didn't have a proper mission. They didn't have proper leadership and guidance, so he refused. Right? And so unfortunately, they tried their best to do tawbah, to repent, to make amends for their rejection of Abu Abdullah, but in the end, they were also crushed by Banu Umayyah. But that's where we get the revolution and the movement of Mukhtar. We know that the reason why he was not in Karbala was because he was in prison. He was actually, when Muslim ibn Aqil comes to Kufa, he's actually staying in the house of Mukhtar, or he has Mukhtar as a very close supporter. And once Muslim is killed, obviously we know that the situation in Kufa was tense. People were being thrown in jail, people were being killed. People had to go underground for fear of their lives, and Mukhtar was one of those people who was captured, put into jail, tortured, abused. Eventually he was released, and that's where he began his movement. He began his movement on the cause, or on the slogan of being avenging of the tragedy of Karbala. And really, to an extent, we can see that his revolution was successful, like, to the extent where he did his best to even capture the people who were responsible for the tragedy of Ashura. And so, for example, when he captures Harmala, before he kills him, he asks him exactly what he did. When he captures, all of the people that he could capture, he makes them confess to their crimes. He tortures them. I don't know if unfortunate, but he tortures some of them in the most unbelievable of ways, that are extremely graphic of nature, and I won't mention them. But he basically makes them confess. He tortures them, they die, and he actually leads the government for about 18 months in Kufa before that is overthrown, and he's also killed. His hands are severed, they're hung on the wall of the city of Kufa, and obviously history continues. He's also a controversial figure because people have different opinions. Some say he advocated for the imamate of Muhammad al-Hanafiya, the half-brother of Imam Hussein, you can say. Most of our scholars are really divided on this personality of Mukhtar. Some don't really trust him, some don't advocate for him, but then we have giants like the late Ayatollah al-Bui and other scholars in our era, in the last, let's say, 25 to 50 years, who basically exonerates Mukhtar of any wrongdoing. And they say that no, because the fourth Imam in Medina, he could not play a direct role and advocate for Mukhtar or advocate for an overthrow of Yazid or Banu Umayyah. Basically, the fourth Imam had to keep silent because of other reasons which were more important to save the community, but he basically gave his silent approval to Mukhtar, and he basically would work through Muhammad al-Hanafiya. Not that he ever considered him to be the Imam of the time, Muhammad al-Hanafiya, no, but in order to maybe deflect attention from the fourth Imam, to keep him preserved and protected for his mission to continue of Islam, basically he went through this route. So most of our scholars have respect for Mukhtar. He wasn't Masoom, obviously he may have made mistakes in his carrying out the judgment and the verdicts against the Qatilan of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but we don't judge him on that. Right? We accept the fact that the fourth Imam gave at least silent approval for this movement, and that what he did would have been in line with what the Imams wanted. We have stories, I'm sure you've heard, that the Ahlul Bayt never smiled after the tragedy of Karbala. We know that the fourth Imam was in a certain state for his entire life. We know that we have stories where some of the ladies of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam never wore makeup, they never purified themselves. But then we're told when Mukhtar killed certain people and he brought the heads to the fourth Imam, that was the first time that he smiled since the tragedy. And so if those reports are authenticated, then we can see that the fourth Imam had a level of approval of Mukhtar and his movement. So obviously he fought against Banu Umayyah in Sham. He won that battle to an extent because obviously he was able to remove them from power, at least temporarily. He fought against al-Zubair and his leadership in the Hijaz, in Mecca, and he won that. And eventually he himself was killed on the 14th of Ramadan in the year 67. And obviously that ended his rule. And Banu Umayyah continued obviously from that, although Yazid was killed, but the Banu Umayyah continued for about 91 years in total. So as we mentioned, the Banu Umayyah took over in around the year 41. This is really after the death of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. That's when they really solidified their power. That's when Muawiyah takes kind of absolute control over the entire Muslim region, right? All the way from Iran in the east, all the way to Egypt, and maybe further than that in the western parts. So 91 years they run the government, they run the show of the Ummah. And obviously at that time, this is getting closer to the Imam of the Imamah to the fifth and sixth Imam. The Banu Umayyah become on the decline. Banu Abbas began to take over. They're also related to the Prophet, ironically, and they raised their own banner as being those who are coming back to give the honor and their leadership to the Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salam. But as I said, with politicians, it's all about tricks and trickery. So although they came under the banner of supporting Ala Muhammad, alayhim as-salam, but they obviously had their own agenda, and they solidified power. And as you know, Banu Umayyah basically took over. Fifth Imam was kind of the end of the Banu Umayyah, Banu Abbas. Banu Umayyah rather take over, lose power at the end of the fifth Imam's imamate. Banu Umayyah take over from the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th Imam. That's why we see, for example, even the seat of government moves. Right? It was in Medina. Amir al-Mu'mineen moves it to Kufa. The Banu Umayyah move it to Sham, to what is present-day Syria, Damascus. Banu Abbas come on the scene, they move the government to Baghdad. That's why we have the 7th and 9th Imams buried in Baghdad. And then after the fight between Harun Rashid's two children, Amin and Ma'mun, the Khilafat moves to what is today Mashhad, Barq, in Khorasan in Iran. And that's why we have Imam Rida alayhi salam buried in Mashhad, because that was the seat of the government. When that Khalif dies, his brother is in Iraq. So obviously you have the 10th Imam, 10th and 11th Imam now in Syria, in Samarra. Right? Samarra was one of the original capitals of present-day Iraq. Because they solidified power, their base was in Samarra. That's why you have the 10th Imam, the 11th Imam in Samarra, and obviously the 12th Imam's Ghaiba beginning there. But they were no better, obviously, than the Banu Umayyah, right? We know that because of the fact that, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 5 of our Imams were forced to leave Medina, either to Iraq or to Iran. So Banu Umayyah, Banu Abbas, they're really two sides of the same coin. It's like the Republicans or the Democrats. It's like the liberals or the conservative party. Whether you vote for one or the other, you're voting for evil. It's just pick your poison. Do you want Justin Trudeau and his politics, or whoever is in charge of the conservative party in their politics, right? We're not going to get anything better out of either party. Right? Not to say that they're as bad as Banu Umayyah and Bani Abbas, Canadian politics, but definitely they're not in it for the people, right? And this is really the reality of where we are at. And obviously, history moves on from there. The Banu Umayyah, the Banu Abbas, they had their own vendetta against Ala Muhammad. They saw them as threats to their power. Although the Ahlul Bayt were never outwardly taking power, but you figure that people like the Imams, the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th Imam, they're only preaching, they're only teaching akhlaq, they're teaching fiqh, they're teaching Quran. They're not leading a counterinsurgency or a revolution actively against the system. But the fact that they could teach in the Masjid of the Prophet, let's say, or Imam Rida alayhi salam to go to Khorasan, and 10, 20, 30,000 scholars, Shia and Sunni scholars, can come out and welcome Imam Rida and ask him to narrate a hadith from Rasulullah. This obviously brought a bit of consternation, a bit of challenge to the Khulafa of the time, that if this one man can be so powerful that 30,000 scholars can come and ask him to relate one hadith, imagine what kind of power he could muster if he had actually a position, or if he was able to have freedom in Medina, or in Baghdad, or in Khorasan, wherever he was. Right? It would mean the downfall of the government, not through a revolution in terms of military revolution, but by the time you can change the hearts of the people, then you can easily bring about a revolt, because people would be able to see through the falsehood, through the facade of Banu Abbas, and they would automatically want to bring about a revolution against them. And because of that, obviously the Banu Abbas had to put the Imams in prison, put them in house arrest, and eventually have them all killed. And that's obviously where we are at today with the ghaiba of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. that he is in the labor, he's in occupation now for over or close to 1200 years because of this entire historical narrative. Not that he's scared to die. Obviously, none of the Ahlul Bayt are scared to die in that way. But obviously, Allah has a mission for him. Allah put him in that ghaiba. It wasn't that the Imam woke up one day and decided to go into a minor and major occultation. No, this was planned by Allah. Allah has a wisdom why he did things in this way. Because he's seen, obviously, the previous prophets, how they were killed, the previous Imams, what happened to them. And because the 12th Imam will play a very pivotal role in the end of days, in the Akhir Zaman, in the latter days, he had to be kept aside. He's on earth, obviously, he's not hiding in space. He's on earth, he lives, he breathes, he eats, he drinks, he sleeps. He has a normal so-called life. Some things about the Imam we know, some things we have no idea. People ask, is he married? We have no idea. Does he have children? No clue. What does he eat for lunch? We don't know. But we know he's alive, he's well, he lives on earth, he goes for Hajj every year. He does other acts of worship, which some of the hadith and some of the narratives speak about. But he is kept away from the fitna, from the challenges of the time, because when the time is right, when we are ready for him, when humanity on the whole is ready, then Allah will allow him to come, and they will begin, him and Prophet Jesus alayhi salam, and the 313 first line responders, the 213 men, the 50 women who will be in the first line of defense of the Imam, the commanders, the generals. They will work with the Imam, along with the thousands of other people, to basically complete what the previous prophets could not do. What the previous Imams were not able to fully materialize, not that they couldn't, but they have to obviously have the help of people, of followers, and obviously that will come about through the return of the 12th Imam. I'm going to end there, and so inshallah, if we have any questions from the sisters or the brothers here on post Karbala or what I mentioned in the 10 nights that we have been here, we definitely have some time to open the floor for questions, whether you want to use the microphone. I think we have one available, that way the sisters can hear the question as well. Or if the sisters have any questions that they want to send here or use the mic or whatever other format, WhatsApp or whatever is available, then please do take this opportunity. And inshallah, we'll do our best to provide an answer as much as we can. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So we are all aware that we are waiting for our Imam, and it is being decided during the Shah. You mentioned that he will take the revenge of the blood of Imam Hussain.
Yes.
So if you could shed some light on how that process, whether it's mentioned, how that process go of taking the revenge, what are the events that will be happening after his arrival that will direct towards that this is the revenge he was destined to take. So if you could shed some light.
Sure. So for the best of my ability from the readings that I've done, there's actually, I guess, two aspects of this revenge or avenging the tragedy of Karbala. One is on the on the grand scheme of things, which is basically to bring justice to those who are directly involved. So although we believe that on the day of judgment, Allah will raise everybody up from the graves, and also there'll be an accountability of Hisab at that time. And Allah will judge by everybody at that time. But the Quran points to this, that there will be a time on earth where other people will be brought back to life. We have this belief in the Shia tradition called Raj'at. Raj'at, I alluded to it one of my nights where I talked about the fact that after the death of the 12th Imam, the previous 11 Imams will come back to life in a certain order in this life on this earth. And at the same time, some of the enemies will also be brought back to life, and they will be punished for their crimes in certain ways. And so one of the beliefs is that those certain people who are responsible for Karbala will be brought back to life. And their punishment will be given to them, or at least one level of that punishment will be given in this world. And that extends really all the way back in history, not just people responsible for Karbala directly, but even those who, we can say, laid the foundations for the tragedy of Karbala. But also at the same time, it would obviously be not just those few people, let's say, the 5 or 10 or 10,000 or even 30,000 or let's say the enemy soldiers, but obviously to also do away with people in contemporary times that have that same ideology, that same Bani Umayyah mentality. Not that Imam will, just blindly go around killing people, but obviously there has to be a level of acknowledgement of their mistakes or sins and repentance. And if they don't obviously repent, if they feel, well, this is, and they're kind of given a clear picture, then there obviously will be a repercussion to pay, which the 12th Imam will basically render at that time. So it will be at both levels of those directly responsible and those who were indirectly responsible, or like even in the ziyarah we say that فَلَعْنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً قَتَلَتْكُمْ, may the la'nat of Allah be of those who killed and fought you. And then it says, وَلَعْنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً سَمِيَتْ بِذَلِكَ فَرَضِيَتْ بِهِ. And those who heard about what happened at Karbala, or in general, in terms of the dhulm and the oppression to Ahlul Bayt, and were given their silent approval. They're on the fence. They didn't support Imam Hussein, and they didn't kind of support Banu Umayyah. Right? So this is also a very important point for us, is that we can never be on the fence when it comes to dhulm, to oppression in this world. Right? You see dhulm happening all around the world, especially to the followers of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salam. And we can never be indifferent and just say, well, it's happening, what can we do? And just shut our eyes to it, right? We have to be, I don't know, that doesn't mean become active in terms of doing certain things or going and traveling and trying to fight wars, right? But at least the minimum, whatever responsibility we have in North America, whether it's writing a letter of petition to our local government, to our local MPs, where we can raise funds to help our fellow brothers and sisters. Like for example, we see what's happening with the Afghani community right now, the Shias of Afghanistan. Obviously, we can't directly go and help and support, but we have the ability to help in the fundraising drives. Right now, many organizations are sponsoring Afghani brothers and sisters, especially from our Shia community, to come to Canada and resettle. Right? So we have these kinds of opportunities that always raise their head in our community, that we should we have to help in one way or another. We can't be indifferent to say, oh, inshallah, everything will be okay. Yeah, everything will be okay, but that being okay means that we have to do something. Right? Just like at Karbala, people can't say, oh, everything will be okay. Right? Imam Hussein will take care of things. Yeah, he would have taken care of things, but we have to, those people also had to be there. So we also have to be careful that we are there at the forefront of the struggle, whether it's politically, if we're active, writing petitions, if we're active on social media, we can let our contacts know about things that are happening. Fundraising, supporting these projects to make sure that those who are the most vulnerable get the support they need. But we never be on the fence and just become indifferent, because maybe that will render us to be in the same camp as Banu Umayyah, just being indifferent to the plight of the Muslim community. Go ahead. So his question was that is it important to read the Quran or to understand the Quran? So I'll respond in English so everybody can understand. Yes. So really both are important, right? To read the Quran is important. Allah tells us many times in the Quran, فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ, read of that of the Quran which is easy for you. So to read the Quran is definitely important, but simultaneously at the same time, we also have to understand the Quran. Right? So reading, definitely, right? Reading, and if you look at the Quran, the Arabic text of the Quran is only the Quran in Arabic. You can't say this is the Quran in English. No, this is an interpretation of somebody who read the Quran in Arabic and translated it into English or to Urdu or to Farsi. So reading the Quran has the maximum benefit. Even if you don't know the meaning of the Quran in Arabic, it's still important to read it or to listen to it. Right? But that should never be the end of it. That should never be the end all and be all. We have to also go the next level, the next stage, which is to understand the Quran. And Allah says this many times in the Quran. For example, He says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Do you people not reflect, do tadabbur, to think and reflect upon the Quran? He says, or are there locks upon your hearts? Right? We all have locks at home. We go home, we lock our front door, and we lock our car. Why? So nobody can break into that. So it's protected, it's safe. So nobody can come in. And nobody can go out even until you unlock the door. So Allah says, do you not reflect on the Quran, or is your heart so locked up that you don't allow the Quran to penetrate your heart? So side by side, and nobody should say, I don't have time to read or reflect on the Quran. No, I'm not saying, and scholars and the Hadith don't say that you read the entire Quran in one night, right? Or you read tafsir from beginning to end. But we make it a plan that every day, even the minimum, we recite one verse of the Quran, and then we go and find respectable tafsir written by Shia, which unfortunately, if you don't know Arabic or Farsi or Urdu, you're going to have a very difficult time to find tafsir of Quran in English, because it's just not there right now, unfortunately, at a level that people can understand and appreciate. There are some attempts online, some commentaries of some ayat and some chapters are done. There's some lectures on YouTube that are available from Shia scholars. But that's an important part, is to read and reflect on the ayats, because just to read and memorize, again, the thawab is there, the reward is there, but ultimately the Quran is not just a book of thawab, right? It's not, oh, I read a verse today, so now I've got 35,000 rewards in my bank account with God, right? At the end of the day, the Quran was meant to read, to reflect, and then to apply to our lives. And the only way that can be done, again, is through reading it. Now, obviously, we'll never get to the maximum level of knowing the full in-depth meaning of every verse. Just to give you an example, there's a verse in Surah Baqarah, chapter 2. I don't remember the number of the verse, but it speaks about the mulk of Sulaiman. وَاتَّبَعُوا مَا تَتْلُو الشَّيَاطِينَ عَلَى مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ وَمَا كَفَرَ سُلَيْمَانُ وَلَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا. And it goes on. So it talks about an event that happened during the time of Prophet Sulaiman, Prophet Solomon alayhi salam, and that he was given the ability to counter black magic, to counter witchcraft. He had all this written in a book, the spells or whatever, from Allah, obviously. He kept the book hidden, he dies. Somebody found that book of magic, of witchcraft, which was supposed to use to counter black magic, and they began to, this is the Quran speaking, the people who found that book began to use it to cause a fight between a husband and wife. The Quran clearly mentions this in the verse, that they were using the magic to bring about fight and a division between a husband and a wife. Now that one verse, right, if you look at it in the Quran, it takes up maybe about a third or a half of the page of Arabic. The late Allama Tabatabai, rahmatullah alayh, in his Tafsir al-Mizan, and also contemporary scholar Ayatollah Jawadi Amali, one of our great commentators in Maraja and Qutb, they say that this verse has over 1 million possibilities of what it could mean. 1 million. Not 10 meanings, not 20, but 1.24 million or something. It's some incredible number. Why is that? Because the way Allah has constructed this verse, there are so many pronouns in this verse that Allah uses, which they could be understood in multiple ways in the Arabic. Right? It's hard for me to explain it in English. You really have to know how Arabic functions. But if you read the verse in Arabic, you will ask yourself, well, where does this pronoun go back to? Right? A pronoun, for example, is if I was to say, Ali and Hassan were in a fight, and he hit him. Right? If I say Ali and Hassan were in a fight and he hit him, did Ali hit Hassan or did Hassan hit Ali? You won't know, because that sentence could be rendered both ways. It could be Ali and Hassan were in a fight, and he hit him means Ali hit Hassan, or it could be that Hassan hit Ali. Both are valid interpretations. But now imagine a verse of a page or half a page where it's not just he and him, there's 20 he and hims in the verse, right? Where do all these pronouns go back to? And so Allama Tabatabai said, based on mathematical understanding, this verse has over 1 million interpretations. So, you and I will never get to understand what is the true meaning of that verse. Right? And even Allama Tabatabai, he wrote maybe 8 or 10 pages of commentary, and he stopped at that. Because there is so much complexity and ambiguity to this one verse that it just baffles the imagination. That doesn't mean that we just, don't read the entire Quran. But no, when we get to ayat like that, we look at it, we reflect on it, and we might not understand it, but we move on. Right? We'll get to a verse, for example, the verse of wudu, let's say, or the verse of khums, or the verse about marriage, right? For example, the verse of the Quran that talks about if a husband and wife have marital dispute, how do you resolve it? Right? Allah says, bring a arbitrator from the man's side, bring an arbitrator from the woman's side, let them sit and discuss. And if there is a clear intention for them to want to help the husband and wife reconcile, then the Quran says Allah will allow that reconciliation to happen. So we could read that verse and say, look, I'm going through a marital problem. I have gone through, Western counseling and this and that, nothing's worked. This verse of the Quran clearly gives me a framework to work on. Let me try and understand and get this verse to apply to my life to work it out. Right? So with that, not only do we read it, but we have to understand and try and implement it.
One more, please.
Sure.
No problem?
No problem.
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question to you, brother.
Okay, we'll finish with the brother and I'll come up to you, sister, 1 second. Thank you. So he's asking, what do the 14 Masumin in the Quran expect from us as followers of the Prophet? Is it limited to just Sina, Zani, Tomatam, these things? Basically, or just the wajibat? Yeah. So basically I would say that in a nutshell, that what the Prophet expects from us with the Quran, what the Ahlul Bayt, what Allah expects from us is within the Quran at one level, and what is further built upon by the prophets. Right? So the minimum is the wajibat, right? The minimum is the obligations which are within the Quran. Praying, fasting, Hajj, all of these things that we all know about that are in the Quran. Obviously, other aspects come into that as well. But the minimum to get us even to be close to Jannah and close to the Prophet and his family is to fulfill our wajibat, the obligations. And that means that everything else becomes secondary in life. They're important, right? Everything else has its importance. Muharram commemorations have their importance. The Matam has its importance, but these things should never overrule the Quran and the obligations we have. Right? They all take priority, and then everything else becomes secondary in nature. You can't do a mustahab action and leave your wajibat, right? And those are clear indications in the Quran and in Islam. You can't pray namaz al-shab, salatul layl, and miss your wajib prayers. Right? If the prayers are wajib, they have to be done, and then everything else comes after that. Yes, sister.
Assalamu alaikum. Every day in Majalis, we hear that we need to, all of us, we have to seek the marifah of Imam Zaman alayhi salam. And but I wanted to ask in the examples of how to bring it in practically in our day-to-day life. What are the activities that we can use? What are actually we are doing, and what we need to add to our day-to-day activities with all the education that we're doing, with all the farzaman that we're doing at home, the chores at home. Like the youth are very helpful at home too, and they need time. But what else can they add, and how can they add, and what already are they doing to gain the marifah of Muhammad alayhi salam? Because that's what they hear every day in Majalis, that we need to seek the marifah. That is a very broad concept. What are the activities that will help them gain it? Thank you.
Very good question. So actually, I have translated a book on that topic. I've translated a book, it came out about maybe 12 years ago. It's called The Last Luminary and Ways to Delve into the Light. There may be a copy upstairs in the library, but I know it's online on alislam.org for free reading and download. So this book is actually based off another book which was written by a past scholar called Mikyalul Makarim, in which this scholar, he basically compiled a 2-volume book of about 1,800 pages on responsibilities that we as the Shia have towards the 12th Imam during the Layla. The one that I translated is basically a summary of that book. So it's about 300 pages. And it presents 80 responsibilities we have towards the 12th Imam. And it's in 99 chapters. But they're very short chapters. Some are just 1 page, 2 pages. And basically what the book does is it outlines our complete responsibilities as the Shias of the 12th Imam during the time of the Layla. Obviously, as you mentioned, the most important aspect of preparing for the 12th Imam is ma'rifah, right? To have knowledge of the Imam. And here ma'rifah is not ilm, right? We have ilm, knowledge, but ma'rifah is a level deeper than just plain knowledge. Like ma'rifah, like for example, if I say have ilm of your Imam, have ilm of the Imam of the time, that could mean, okay, I know that what year he was born, what day, what city, what hair color he has, how tall he has. This is knowledge of the Imam. But many times knowledge is of no benefit, right? Or it serves very little benefit. So if I know the Imam, I'm just throwing a number out there. He's 6'2" and he has brown hair and gray eyes, right? That has no benefit to me. It's not going to make me a better Shia to know what the Imam, how he looks, or how much, or what he eats for food, or what his daily caloric intake is. So ma'rifah goes deeper than that, and it basically means we have a better understanding of the Imam of the time, right? And that includes, for example, the goals of his mission. That includes the signs of the dhuhur, the alamat of the dhuhur of the Imam. It includes also things, as you mentioned, what do we do to practically, at a practical level? Anything that basically can get us to fulfill our responsibility to the 12th Imam falls into that category. Now, the beauty of it, though, as well, is that there are times that you and I, and the young women, the young men in this community, there are things that we are probably doing on a daily basis already, right? That we have to just tweak the niyyah, the intention, and it falls into the category of preparing for the 12th Imam, right? Let's just say reciting some of the du'as, right? Some of the du'as that we have are recommended to be recited in order for the protection and preservation of the 12th Imam. We might recite these, but if we change the intention with why we're reciting them, we are putting ourselves in a preparatory stage for the Imam. And obviously changing the niyat, changing the intention of an action can change the impact on us, right? Because Islam basically is not just a religion of the physical, right? We have the physical and then we have metaphysical. There are a lot of realities in the world that we can't see, we can't touch, we can't feel, but they exist around us. X-rays, we can't see an X-ray, but yet we know they exist. We all have cell phones. We know that they communicate somehow. We don't see the wave, the signals going, but we know that these cell towers are emitting and our phones are emitting and receiving. So in Islam, we also believe that there are things beyond this physical realm. And when we change our intention, we change the impact on us, right? A very simple example is giving charity. Right? One day you just give somebody some money. You see a homeless person or some cause, you give $5 or $10, but you just have a completely blank mind. You're just giving it for maybe just to get this person off your back and following you down the road and just to get them to stop following you, you give them $10. That $10 you give them may not have any spiritual impact on you because you didn't have the right intention. You still did a good action. Allah might reward you, or He inshallah will reward you in the world to come. But the impact or the effect of charity on you as a spiritual being may not be realized. But if you have the intention that you're helping them for a good cause, human being, they're suffering, you want to give to them, and maybe it's part of your daily sadaqah that you would have given anyway, then you change the intention of the action, and therefore you change the impact of that action on your being. So literally this book will, again, it'll give you a lot of perspective in terms of what we should be doing, and the beauty of Islam is not just du'as, right? Du'as are definitely important. I never downplay the importance of du'a because we have a hadith where the Prophet has said that nothing can change the qada, the fate. La yaruddu al-qada illa du'a. That nothing can change your and I destiny that Allah has written for us except for du'as. Right? So du'as are important. And that becomes a mainstay, a staple in our connection to Allah and connection to the Imam. But for example, if we have, let's say, the young brothers and sisters in this community, if just as an example, let's say there's a basketball league of the guys. If they're just going out playing basketball, just generally just to have fun, they're just having fun. But if they were to change the niyyah that we're having a basketball club under the Husseini Association, and the goal is for us to meet with one another from the community, to spend time with one another, we'll go and play basketball, establish a friendship, establish community amongst the community members, then that basketball becomes an act of ibadah. It's worship of Allah, right? Because you change your intention while you're playing sports. And the same goes with the sisters. Right? If the women or the sisters or the mothers are doing activities together, and they change the intention, and look, we're having even something like baking or cooking or something, or going on, the women want to play sports as well, or maybe canoe down the South Saskatchewan River. But they're doing it with the intention that they want to establish a group of sisters that work together, that are playing together, that are trying to build families together, to have their children and families to be united. Then that action of the women becomes an act of worship. Just like du'as, just like the praying, just like everything else, that then becomes a way to prepare also for the 12 Imam to fulfill our responsibility to him. Hopefully that answers your question.
Jazakumullah khair, Maulana. Extending to this question, I have another one actually. Can you also explain with an example how ilm is connected to hilm? I know that ilm is knowledge and hilm can be translated as forbearance, but how are they connected, and can you give us more examples for it? Thank you.
Sure. So I mean, definitely, many times we face episodes in life where our patience is being tested, right? Whether it's at work with coworkers, whether it's with family members, whether it's in a community as well, right? We have community members we always don't see eye to eye with, and many times maybe we have disputes, arguments, and that tests our patience, our hilm, our sabr. But where ilm plays a great role in that is that ilm knowledge, it can basically not necessarily overcome those problems that we're facing, although it can, but it can allow us to better manage our stress, our anxiety, our how we perceive the situation that we're in, right? So as an example, if me and a friend, let's say from the community or at work, or we work together, or we, friends or family that are living together, and let's just say there is an outburst at work, and the person says something they shouldn't have said or does something they shouldn't have done, right? Most times our immediate reaction would be to react to that, right? They yelled at me, I'm going to yell at them. They did something to me, my natural reaction, I'm going to do something to them. Right? Somebody cuts you off on the highway, and you do something to them, or you try and do something to them to get back at them. Right? That's maybe a natural human reaction that we have to events and things that come and test our patience. But if we had more knowledge about that person, right? Maybe, for example, we're at work and somebody said something to us, and we don't know why they did that to us. But what if we found out, we took the time to bear it with patience? What if we find out that, they just had a loved one pass away, or maybe that person themselves are now diagnosed with cancer, and it's something that they're not able to fully wrap their head around. Right? We had knowledge, we didn't know that, and so we reacted to how they were going to how they acted to us. But if I had that ilm of what they're going through, I knew what the situation is in their personal life, I would change my reaction to them. I would say to myself, look, I recognize that they are going through tough times. They're not able to control what is going through their life, and so I'm going to basically bear that insults or whatever with patience, and we'll talk about it with them at a later date when they're more kind of collected. So ilm definitely will play a role in how we react to other people. Many times we become judgmental. Somebody does something, we critique them, we criticize them. We are quick to judge other people, but only if we knew what they were going through, then things might have been different, right? And that calls for that sabr, that patience, and that's why the Quran even, or not the Quran, rather, where the Hadith tell us that give the believer especially 70 opportunities, right? Have a good thoughts about a believer when they do something bad. Give them at least 70 excuses for why they did that to you. 70 doesn't have to be exactly 17. It shouldn't be 59. And it shouldn't be 77. No, the understanding is that be very tolerant of other people because you don't know what they're going through. And once you learn what they're going through, then that will change how you perceive or what they did to you. And it's obviously difficult. I definitely recognize as human beings, we are always quick to judge. We're reactionary. Things happen in the heat of the moment, and we're quick because we have to come up with a quick response. Maybe human beings, we have that flight or that fight or flee mechanism built into us. Either I stand my ground and curse that person out, or I take off and I become a wimp, right? But we have to recognize that there has to be something in the middle, and that is that recognition that people are going through different things in life, and we don't know what they're going through. So once we can get to that level of knowing them, knowing what they're going through, then hopefully we will be able to not only see why they reacted, but hopefully that would be a way for them to actually change their ways. I remember this happened to me when I used to work at BlackBerry. That one of our managers, he got mad at one of the employees, and I happened to be there in the office, in the boardroom at the time, and he kind of blew his top. He got really upset at one of the people, and the employee left the meeting or the boardroom, and it was just me and the manager, and basically he took a step back, and I spoke to him, and he recognized that he had kind of overstepped his reaction to the situation was more than what had been called for. So he ended up apologizing to this man, but once we were able to talk about what happened and recognize the situation, he realized through that knowledge that he was wrong and the employee was right, and he made amends for it. So definitely having that knowledge will allow us to reassess the situation and come back to our humanity. Hopefully that helps.
Can I just, so I have a couple of requests and then comment and a suggestion. So you had mentioned in your speeches, you had mentioned that there are a number of ayats that we should all know. You had mentioned like the Surah Al-Jan, sorry, Surah Baqarah, 177, that you alluded to.
Yes.
So maybe, I don't know if it's possible for the ones that you mentioned in your speech, and maybe some key ones, if you could send them to the Zayed and then you can forward it to the rest of us, at least some of the key ones. And also, you had also told us that you're working on the Surah Quran and Surah Fatiha is done, and that's available. So also, if you could send a link, that could be forwarded to the rest of the community.
Sure.
And to be sending WhatsApp group or email. The comment or the suggestion is that, all of us who have come to Dallas for like 30, 40, 50 years, we kind of know, or at least have a very good idea of basically or what happened. But our message is not getting outside of the walls of Rosalie or the broader world. I mean, even like things like Mom said, TV, like most people are not going to tune into it, or like there are efforts. One of the ways of approaching this or trying to sort it out would be to try to get a group of people working on something like Wikipedia. I mean, I know that in many of the, there is a Shia version and a Sunni version or our version, but maybe it could be done, and maybe it is already being done, I'm not aware of it, but there could be a group of people dedicated to getting the message out in neutral avenues, right? And Wikipedia is just one example, there could be others. And maybe use the Sunni references, and I'm sure there are so many, for most of these instances, there are so many references that could be alluded to, and just have a full-time secretariat working on that.
Yeah, so point 1 and 2, definitely I'll get in touch with Brother Zahid via WhatsApp and send the details to him. And then he can send it out to the community. For point number 3, definitely there's a lot that we can do to spread the name and spread the mission and the story of Karbala. Some things have been done. I think there are kind of wiki pages out there. There's alislam.org is the largest site in English, at least that has a lot of the content. There is also, to an extent, video content on YouTube. Unfortunately, you have to really curate it. You have to really go through, because, every hour there is, I think, 4,000 hours of video content being uploaded to YouTube every hour, or maybe every minute. There's 4,000 hours of content being uploaded. It's a crazy stat, right? And even if you type in Imam Hussein on YouTube, you'll get videos from the Wahhabi Salafis to everybody else, right? So the problem is to how do we know what's relevant, what's authentic? Unfortunately, we don't have, and I talked about this to one of the brothers a couple of days ago, I think, is that we don't have an organization, I would say in Canada at least, that is dedicated to doing this kind of work. We have a lot of non-profit charities that are doing a lot of other things in other parts of the world. But in terms of education, and especially educating the Canadian public about these kinds of issues, we don't have anything like that, unfortunately. So it's going to call for somebody or some group to step forward, to organize, to create an institution or something, like a non-profit institute or some model that can, employ people to not only curate what's online, to find the trustworthy books and articles, but go onto YouTube and find the videos, license them or whatever, and then put them all into one repository. Iran has done a great job in Farsi, obviously, because that's their language. From the Haram of Imam Hussein and Abu Bakr al-Abbas alayhim salam in Karbala, they have amazing websites in Arabic that have done this. They have this encyclopedia of Imam Hussein, which is like 80 volumes. But we don't have anything in English because we just don't have the manpower right now, unfortunately. But it has to come from somewhere, but it just hasn't come yet. So, but it's obviously a valuable suggestion, and something that will have to be taken up, inshallah, one day. Let me just see if there's anything from the sisters upstairs before I take a question from the floor down here. Sisters, do you have anything that you would like to share? Question or anything, please? Going once? Going twice? Okay, we'll take the question from the floor and then we'll go back to the sisters if there's anything after the question from here.
First of all, thanks for such a thoughtful session for the last 10 minutes. Request to the audience to recite thumbs up. I'm keep recording, keep taking notes for the last 10 minutes. The one word you will keep using was contemporary, and we just use the term just few minutes of those by saying that contemporary translation of number 5, Al-Mizan. So being part of the madrasa and being part of the youth for the last couple of years, I like to have a thoughtful suggestion from you to please give us any 3 sustainable suggestions of it, so they can incorporate their life on a daily basis. As I have already had a discussion with you a couple of days ago, and while we are walking, while we are playing, something can be do some keep engaging our mind.
Yes.
So youth is here, communities here, please give top 3 sustainable solutions which can help.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we have so many hadith that that point to the importance of the youth in that age group. The hadith that tell us, for example, that the earth, that the mind of a young man or woman is like a fertile ground. Whatever you put on that ground is what it will grow. You have, mashallah, farmland all around Saskatoon. If you go out in the spring, the farmers are planting their crops. And you know better than I do, you're in this industry, that when you have a good piece of land and it's fertilized, it's got the minerals in the soil, the nutrients, whatever you almost whatever seed you put, it will grow. And so the hadith tell us that the mind of the youth is like that, right? If they are only fed Netflix, well, guess what they're going to turn out to be, right? You feed them music, the haram music, that's all they're going to be in life. It's into that kind of a thing. But we have to recognize that, that the youth, that period of our life is, we definitely should never take it for granted, right? This is coming from me. I was born in Canada. I lived in Edmonton for half of my life before I moved overseas. And you realize that you never want to waste the time of your youth, right? Now, that doesn't mean you don't have fun. No, we have hadith about time management, the seventh Imam, where he says that you should divide your time into 4 portions, not people, but you have to have time per day. The very first one he says is for munajat, to speak to Allah. So, as believers, men and women, young and old, but young especially, we should never neglect our connection with Allah. The minimum is the 5 daily prayers. More than that, obviously, the taqibbat, the du'as that we recite have to be there. The second part of the hadith, the seventh Imam says that you have to spend the time of your day for your own livelihood, for your obligation. So whether that means you go to school, that's your obligation. When the time from your time you're 5 until you finish university, that is your wajibat, is to go to school, get a good education, get a good career. Whether you become an entrepreneur or your own businessman or you work, whatever it is, but that's a part of it. The third part, he says, is to spend with your friends, especially those friends, he says, who will point out your defects, who are close friends, who you can be honest with, and they're honest with you, and they will tell you when you're doing wrong. Right? Many times, unfortunately, we may get friends who are not of our religion, which is okay to an extent, but obviously, they're not going to worry about namaz time. They're not going to worry about, hey, you know what, there's a bar, we shouldn't be going there. They'll warn, just come and hang out. We're not going to drink. We can just hang out and have a Coca-Cola or whatever. And then the fourth part of the hadith, the Imam says, you use that part, one part of your day is for your halal pleasures, for your fun in life, right? Whether it's a video game, a good video game, not like GTA that you're playing, or any of these violent games that are out there, Call of Duty to an extent, with the vulgarity at some of these games is questionable. But GTA definitely is, especially with GTA 5 and beyond. Don't play them. It's coming from experience. It was free, okay, so that's why I downloaded it. But the Imam says engage in fun activity. And the beauty of the hadith is the Imam says when you give importance to especially that last portion, he says you'll be able to regulate your entire day. Right? So when you have time for yourself to play games or go out and play sports, right? As it is, our summers in Canada are so short, right? We shouldn't be sitting at home playing video games. Right? We should be out playing basketball or whatever we're into, or whatever we like to play. But he says when you can regulate your activity, especially your fun time, then you can regulate your prayers, you can regulate your work, your school, your friends, your family commitments. Right? So it's about time management, and so one thing definitely for the youth is, and for everybody, but the youth especially, is make sure you manage your time appropriately. Right? Don't waste time. Don't get stuck on YouTube watching a video, then you get down that rabbit hole. Oh, there's another video, and then there's another video, or you're on TikTok, which is even worse because they're short videos. You can watch, maybe 1,000 TikToks in an hour type of thing, right? You just wasted an hour of your day. Right? And I don't say that you just use that time to study and this and that, but there has to be a limit of entertainment and fun in life, right? And there has to be a time of seriousness, right? So definitely manage your time. That time that you do have available, let's say you're commuting to work, you're on the bus, or you're on the transit, or maybe you're driving, or maybe you're into jogging, right? You go to jogs or hikes or walking around, enjoying nature. You can either just be walking and doing nothing, just taking in the environment, or you can be listening to a podcast. Right? We all have phones, we all have our AirPods and this and that, and our Samsung buds. Right? So why not find a good podcast where you can learn something? It could be a religious podcast, like a lecture, or there's some great podcasts. There's one from a group, actually there's 2 brothers, they're both scholars, Sheikh Amin and Mahdi Rastani. They're based out of Texas. So they run Mizan Institute. They have great series of podcasts. They probably have maybe 300 or 400 podcasts already on their Spotify. There's another friend of mine, Sheikh Zuhair Ismail. who runs the Tool Foundation out of London, England. He also has a podcast. I can send them all to the Jamaat the links. I think it's under Batul Foundation. He does short little 3-4 minute podcasts where he'll review a hadith and he'll give like a 3 or 4 minute explanation of that hadith, right? So while you're commuting to work or school, if you have 10-15 minutes, put in one of these podcasts. You might not want to open a book, or you might not feel comfortable reading, or you're driving, obviously you can't read. But if you're commuting in your car, you can easily put in a 5-10 minute podcast, listen to it, get to your destination, and you're done, right? So I'll put some podcasts together that I know of and that I kind of trust that are from respectable scholars. So time management is important. That free time that you do have, right, is try to fill it with things that will benefit you. And I think, lastly is also just to have a love for the religion of Islam, and not necessarily from the cultural or traditional perspective. That's important to an extent, but to really have that true depth of knowledge of Islam. And for some people, like myself, that meant I had to leave my life in Canada and I moved to Iran to study. It's a very viable option. Many times people don't think about, well, can I go and study Islam full time? Again, I was born in Northwest Territories, grew up in Edmonton, yet I got married and moved to Iran. Right? And my wife and I were studying, first in New York we moved to, and then we moved to Iran. So that's also something that I think people, especially the youth in the community, have to consider as a possibility, right? Is to actually move forward in that direction, is to think about Islam as, I don't call it a career path, it's more of a calling. It's kind of when Allah kind of puts that spark in your heart. It happened to me when I was like 22, 23. But that's also something that the youth also have to think about. It's great to have engineers and doctors and lawyers. One of the brothers asked me actually, after one of the majalis, one of the nights about this. And basically I said to him, and I'll repeat it to you, is that before you go from high school and transition into university or college, if you're thinking about a career, first thing you should think about is not how much money I'm going to make. I'm going to make 200,000 or this much or that much. Money is important, no doubt. But the first thing I told him is that think and ask yourselves that when the 12th Imam comes, could he use my profession in his government? Right? He's going to need engineers because you're going to have to build a whole world. You're going to have buildings, you're going to have massage, you're going to have business towers. He'll need engineers. He'll need doctors because people will get sick. He'll need lawyers. He'll need graphic designers to design all these banners. These are made by somebody somewhere on a computer that they're printed. He needs graphic designers for his revolution. I mentioned this in Vancouver when I gave a lecture in Muharram about 4 years ago, and I'll mention it here that our sisters today, when they wear hijab, usually they'll go back to Pakistan, they'll go to India, they'll go to Afghanistan, they'll go to Iraq, they'll go to the Middle East or the Far East and buy their hijab from there, right? Because that's where they're made. But my thought is, why don't our sisters become fashion designers? Why can't we have sisters who take that as a study in school, they become fashion designers and they design hijab for women in Canada, right? For working women with the fabric that are conducive to Canadian environment, that will, not absorb the rain, that would be good in the summer when it's too hot, right? The colors and the styles, not that hijab is a fashion or a style, but obviously want their hijab to match the outfit, let's say in the workplace. But why not have our sisters become fashion designers? Design modest clothing for women, right? They don't have to just go to the department store and buy things off the shelf, but they actually have Muslim women who have created an entire line of wardrobe. Nike can design hijab for women and charge like $50 or so for a hijab with a Nike branding on it, right? But why can't our sisters become designers, create an entire line of clothing? The 12th Imam will need that, right? Because women will wear hijab at the time of Imam. So why not our sisters today take that as a profession? Imam will need women in hijab, and why not our women create the clothing they want to wear? So my point is that before you go into post-secondary is talk to your resident scholars or talk to scholars or people who are aware of these kinds of things and say, what kind of a government will the 12th Imam have? What's going to be needed at that time? And then plan your career path in that way. And don't think that anything is too, insignificant, right? It could be a butcher. It could be a person who owns a halal restaurant. People will need to eat. Sorry? Did you say something? No. Oh, okay, sorry. It could be anything, right? As long as it is halal, as long as it is a permissible income and you're not going to be involved in haram activity, right? Go down that path, but do so with the intention that when the 12th Imam comes, and if I'm alive, I'm going to use this profession to further the goals and the path of the 12th Imam. And so we have to think about that from a young age, right? When we're in middle school and high school. Look at the money, fine, but look more at how can the 12th Imam use my skills in his government. I would say those points. Thank you.
Maulana sir, thank you very much for your kind lectures and educations over the last few days. A philosophical question: why following the religion is difficult? Why are there complexities in our own religion in a way? For example, when somebody confronts and says, "Well, why did they not clearly mention the 12 imams and 14 imams in the Quran?" And if you look at the bigger picture, for example, if you take a snapshot of the world, 7 billion, 8 billion people, there's only so many of us who we believe are on the righteous path. Why is this discrepancy? Why is it difficult to be on the right path? Why there are so less of people on the right path? Why is religion so difficult? And how do we find the energy within ourselves to stick to the right path? What should motivate us during those dark days? Thank you.
Good questions there. A lot to unpack in it too.
Yeah.
So at one level, I would say Islam being complex or difficult to follow to an extent is true. But I think Islam as a religion is difficult to follow only because of the fact that society is so complex today. If you think about life, when you read stories about 200, 300, 500 years ago, religion would have been very simple, right? It would have been localized. It would have been very, economic systems were very, they were not developed at that time. So a lot of the rulings that we have today, for example, would have been there, but they would not have been really that complex to understand. But I think at one level, because humanity and society have continued to develop and progress, that adds more complexity to our life, right? Like any rules in our life, like I talked about one night about rules, right? On the 4th or 5th night. If you look at it, before we had cars and vehicles, people just walked or used horse or camels. There were no need for stop signs and traffic violations and speed limits because it was a very simple life. As things evolve, things become more complex, our rules become more complex. So at one level, because our life has become more difficult, the rules of Islam have just become more intricate and more granular to follow. But at the same time, as I mentioned one of the nights, is that if we don't know Islam, but we know culture, then Islam becomes difficult to follow. What I mean by that is, I mentioned that on one of the lectures, is that many times as a community or as individuals, we take our culture to be our religion. And our culture is very, it plays a very deep role in our lives. And many times our religion, or our culture rather, will make things more difficult for us than they have to be. Whereas Islam came to not do away with culture, but regulate our lives and really bring about a sense of what Allah expects from us. We make life more difficult for ourselves. There's so many examples where, in some cultures, for example, when a woman gives birth, she can't come into the masjid, or she can't come into the Husayniyah for 40 days, let's say. Some cultures believe this in the Muslim community. When a woman gives birth, she can't do this, she can't do that, she can't touch the Quran, she can't do, all of these things, right? She has to stay in her home, cocoon, right? She can't leave the house. But that's not Islam, that's a cultural aspect. So we've imposed that on the religion and made it difficult. There's many other examples, I think, like that, where we've taken our culture and the intricacies of our culture, we say, well, this is Islam. And it's made our life more difficult to follow. Whereas Islam was, the rulings, if we follow the rules of Islam, it would have been very easy. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that Islam is only black and white. There's a lot of nuances within the religion, right? But those nuances are based on akhlaq, on Islamic morals, right? For example, in Islam, and men might not like to hear this, but for a woman, she's not obligated to cook and clean. Right? A woman's job is not to cook or clean or do any of that. It's not to mop the floors or vacuum or make breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the husband or do his laundry. None of that is wajib on the woman. She only has really one or two obligations to do, right? But then that would obviously, to live a life like that would make life very difficult. If the woman was only going to say, I'm only going to do what is wajib on me, and the husband says the same thing, life would not be, you couldn't live life. So that's where we have all of the kind of the recommendations, the mustahabat, the way that the Prophet lived, the way that Amir al-Mu'mineen and Lady Zahra alayhi salam lived, that kind of add that, those kind of boundaries, right? But if we just follow the cultural aspect, we're going to lose the big picture. And at the same time, if we're extremely strict to Islamic teachings, we also lose the big picture of life. So at one level, I think we have to realize that modern life has made life difficult, has made Islam difficult, but at a level, we've also made life difficult with our culture. Why is it, for example, that things that are so needed to know in Islam or practice aren't as clear in the Quran? Like why aren't the 12 Imams mentioned by name? Could have just been one easy verse from Allah to reveal. I think most of our scholars kind of go towards this understanding that if Allah were to include everything in the Quran, then the book would be 10 times as it is today, right? So one of the universals that has been known from the early days of Islam for sure, but even the previous prophets, is that the messenger that was coming with the book, he was instructed and he was obligated to teach the book, right? So the Quran, for example, contains only the general rules, and then it was up to the prophet to go and teach the rules. So it's almost as if Allah wanted the Muslim community to recognize the role of the prophet in the lives and his successors. That the book cannot contain everything until the end of this world. Like for example, Allah could not have in the Quran talked about cell phones or how to use modern technology, right? And the Prophet probably could never have spoken to his companions directly about these things, because if he was knowing of those things, he would never have been able to convince the companions that a day would come where you could hold a thing in your hand and people could see you in the other part of the world. Although we do have hadith about that, believe me, there's hadith from the Imams where they say at the end of time, at the time of the 12th Imam, people will be able to talk to their family member on the other side of the world, and they won't be in the same location as one another. So maybe that was an allusion to cell phones, or maybe we'll have 3D hologram technology in the future. So we have certain hadith that indicate some future predictions. But the point being is that the Prophet, the Imams in the Quran couldn't speak about a lot of the things to take us till the end of time, because the book would obviously A, be too big, and B, it would be out of the realm of understanding of people. So that's, I think, why we have the Quran calling the Prophet a teacher of the book, right? وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. He teaches them the book and the wisdom, his sunnah. And the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, as we believe, all the 14 Masumeen, they're all the representatives of Allah. So we follow all of them. But then we have ijtihad, as I talked about marja'iyat, where they take the Quran, they take the hadith, and they basically use an entire science that has been created to formulate and to understand that in XYZ situation today, based upon the Quran and hadith, this would be our responsibility. Right? So I think it's a combination of all of that for us as believers to recognize that we can never be devoid of the Prophet and Imams, even though we don't have direct connection to them today, that we rely on the Maraja to kind of guide us through that process. But we're not like other Muslims out there who don't have that level of guidance. Right? And I mentioned that a couple of nights ago about how, for example, the majority Muslim community, they shut the doors of ijtihad, 1,000 years ago, right? When Abu Hanifa and Malik and all these people were on the scene, ijtihad was there, right? They could, well, even that, it wasn't an ijtihad, it was something different. But the point being is that they said after the death of their fourth, of the fourth Imam of theirs of the school of fiqh, that from today onwards, there's no more ijtihad. Now you follow what we gave as a fatwa 1200 years ago. Right? So that Islam that remains stagnant, it can't progress forward till today. And they can't go to a scholar and say, what do I do? They don't have an Imam. They don't have the Prophet directly with them. So I think all of that kind of joins us to this realization that today, that Allah wanted it to be like this, so that there would always be a continuous connection to the Imam of the time, albeit even though he's in occultation in Ghaiba, but through the scholarship that are trusted, that are respectable, that have the authority to guide, that we continue to rely upon them, and that they would basically try their best to give us the answers to those pressing issues in life. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me just ask the sisters if there's any questions from the ladies' side before we go back down here. If you want to write the questions down and send them in the messenger, that's also okay. Or you can WhatsApp it to somebody maybe. Bismillah, go ahead.
Just a quick comment. I want to ask you good advice to you about how to plan for future. Can you give them an idea what is the approaches, like a reactive approach and proactive approach in their life? How can they make your future more effective?
Yeah, so how to be proactive rather than reactive in life. So I mean, that can take shape in many different ways in different fields. I think one of the examples that a very wise man once gave me is before you go to university, before you're planning your career, we tend to just think, okay, what's going to be happening in 4 years from now? I'm going to go to university studying in 2021, 2025, I'll graduate. What's my job outlook going to be, right? But maybe we have to look at ourselves or have, a think tank within our Shia community in North America or the world that is looking at the entire globe, right? What is the global economy looking like? What's going to be the need in 10 years from now? What's going to be the need in the short term, in the midterm, in the long term, right? Are we going towards, let's say, artificial intelligence and robotics and computers at that level? And if so, what's the job scope like? What does the career path look like to get to there, right? Or is it, let's say, project management, right? Nowadays, there's this Monday.com and all of these softwares that do, project and team management. Well, should I go and become a project manager and study for 3, 4, 5 years to end up with a degree or a piece of paper that is not relevant in the market anymore? Right? A lot of professions are kind of, they're going the way of the dinosaur, right? There's a lot of things out there that are no longer relevant in the industry. There was a day when people would, for example, repair things, right? And I know we have people who repair cell phones. I'm not taking away their business, but there's a lot of people who do repairs of electronics and technology. But in 5 years or 10 years, will it be there still, right? So right now, it's definitely a need. People are still fixing smartphones. They're still fixing some levels of technology. But what about in 5 or 10 years when it's a complete, either a modular device where you just can fix it on yourself? And there's some companies that have played with cell phones of modular, or even now there's modular computers that have come out. There's some videos about where you can upgrade things on your own very easily. But let's say in 10 years, let's say the experts are saying, you know what, there will be no need for fixing. It'll be so cheap to just buy a new one, or more, maybe it'll be impossible. And, for those who know cell phones, like I worked at BlackBerry for 10 years. Back in 2005, you just had a screwdriver, you took out 4 screws, you opened up, you looked at the motherboard, you soldered a new USB, USB port on it, and you're done in 5 minutes. But today's phones are so intricate, everything is put onto the motherboard that you can't just replace it. You can't even replace an iPhone, the button on it, without having to reprogram the entire phone, because there's a microprocessor in it. But who knows what they'll do in 5 or 10 years, right? It may be completely obsolete and you will not be able to repair it. Right? So as a community, especially young men and women who are looking for a career path, right, they can't be reactionary, right? Oh, I did 5 years and now there's no job. Now I need to go back to school. right? We have to be, as a community, again, forward thinking. We have to have think tanks. We have to have people who are looking at the global economy. What is the need of humanity in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years? What's the food supply going to look like in 15 years or 20 years? Is it going to be, this beyond meat, all this genetically created meat and things like this? What's going to be the food, the drink industry? What's going to be entertainment? What's going to be the clothing and textile industry? And I'm sure there's groups and organizations out there that are charting what are the new trends coming. Right? And we're not on that bandwagon, right? We're reactionary. Oh, there's a new profession coming. Let me go and study that, and let me try to, graduate and get into that career. Right? You might be in there only for 5 or 10 years, and you're going to be found that you're redundant because that whole job market is now gone. So we have to be not reactive. We have to be proactive to study what's happening, technology, finance. Even something as finance. Right? For those who invest in the stock market. There was a time when it was all on Wall Street, right, where you had to be there physically. Now, all of us, I know I do. I have the app on my phone, and I trade middle of a majlis. I could be trading stocks or cryptos and making money before the majlis. I know I don't do it, but I could, right? But that could put stock brokers out of business, right? And there's a lot of pushback because of this. If you watch, videos online, you'll see this pushback and all of the illegal things happening in the stock market. But the point is that is flipping the entire industry over, right? Now you can sit at home and trade stocks like the millionaires on Wall Street or Bay Street, right? Just through your app, right? But nobody would have imagined that 10 or 20 years ago. Right? Then look at YouTube. Who ever thought that YouTube could dethrone television or Netflix could destroy, cable TV? But it has. So again, if we're proactive, we're having these, and we have a lot of talent, alhamdulillah. We have a lot of professionals all across North America and Europe who are big businessmen, who are, investors, who know the markets, who know the world, who know politics. Right? If we were to get together and form this kind of a think tank where we can actually chart out what is the future going to look like, and then we get our youth to go into those fields, then it would obviously be much better off than, a youth is spending 4, 5, 6 years in school and getting a piece of paper at the end, but not necessarily being able to move forward in life.
So one of the few days there was this one lecture you had about backbiting and stuff.
Yes.
So I had a question about how we give lana and stuff like Yazid, all the oppressors. So is that a form of backbiting?
No, definitely not. So backbiting is basically when you say something about somebody else, which is true about them. But there's a couple of things here. So it's limited only to the mu'min, to the believer. Some scholars actually take it to mean only Shia ibn Ashur. But when it comes to people like Yazid, like Muawiyah, the previous governors or rulers of the Muslim Ummah, those who came after these people, their crimes are open because they didn't hide it. It's not like, and it's not like they did them unintentionally. Like for example, if you see a mu'min brother or a sister, they do something, and they're doing something definitely that is haram, right? But there's a lot of more questions about that. Like, you don't know did they know it was haram or not? Right? Let's just say you go into the mall and you see somebody who's eating a hamburger from, I don't know, McDonald's, right? You know it's haram, but do they know it's haram is one question, right? Maybe they were brought up in a way that they were not told it was haram, right? Because sometimes maybe people come from countries, maybe coming from Pakistan or from the Middle East, where McDonald's is all halal, KFC is halal, right? These are all halal over there. And so sometimes, and I had this happen to a brother who moved from Iran to Canada. He was studying at university at Waterloo. And so the first couple of days he came to Canada, he called me up and I took him grocery shopping and he's buying beef and chicken like he's back in Iran. I said, no, slow down, bro. You can't do that here, right? He's like, what do you mean, right? And I was like, no. I said, not everything here is halal. If I go to a halal butcher shop, then yeah, go ahead, buy whatever you want. But if I take you to Superstore or No Frills or Walmart, you can't just buy any meat because he didn't know. Right? So I said, no, look, you have to go to the halal section. It has to have this halal stamp. It should be one of these recognized bodies that certifies the halal process. But if you see somebody in the mall, they're eating a Big Mac, don't just, oh, look at them eating a Big Mac, haram. I'm gonna go and put it on social media, right? Because you don't know why they're doing that. They may generally not know that it's haram. That's the very first thing, right? People like Yazid and Muawiyah and even the first three Khulafa, right? When we say what we do about them, it's not because they didn't know, like they knew what they were doing. Right? Like Yazid knew, as we can read through history, that he knew what he was involved in. And so when we speak about that and we, outline it, it's not like we're doing riba about it, right? Just like Allah in the Quran, Allah speaks about Fir'aun, Allah speaks about even the wives of the Prophet. If you look at Aisha and Hafsa, the two wives of the Prophet, chapter 66, Surah Tahrim, it speaks directly about them. And Allah does riba about them if you want. If you want to use that term, Allah speaks about those two wives of the Prophet and the insults and the way they used to make fun and actually insult the Prophet. And Allah openly talks about it. Right? So nobody can say that, oh, it's not allowed to talk about Aisha or Hafsa because they're the wives of the Prophet, al-Mu'mineen. Right? No, the Quran speaks about them, and Allah clearly tells us the crime that they did. And Allah even threatens them with divorce. And Allah tells the Prophet, Allah tells the two wives that if the Prophet were to divorce you, Allah would give you better wives, much more pure, much chaste and believing and submissive and all of these qualities. So when we look at people like them or the Khulafa or the Banu Umayyah or Banu Abbas, definitely we can never say it's riba to talk about their crimes. They were done in the open. It was done with full awareness of what they were doing. If we have a recorded hadith that they did repentance, okay, fine, we'll accept that. Right? But that has to go through a stringent process of validation. The two of you are forgiven. Right? Allah says, if you are to forgive, then Allah will forgive you. If you follow the chain of Aisha's life, where she fights Jamal against Imam Ali, where she instigates the people to shoot the so on top of that, in a negative way, is for the and they had no shame in doing it. Yes. I don't know, do we have time for one more?
This is the last question.
Last one? Okay.
Okay. So a lot of the youth, they follow social media. I was wondering, how do you make sure you're following the correct source? Because there could be a lot of posts on social media, especially Instagram, that they really might use, and they might use this implement in their life. For example, one sentence posts, or how you test the posts, or maybe they'll read data and you make sure the sources coming from the right or wrong.
Good question. Yeah, so basically the brother's asking that how can we trust what's on social media, Instagram, other posts, we see things and sometimes people use it even against other believers. I would say my rule is don't listen to social media, So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, Twitter. I don't use TikTok still, so although my daughter's pushing me to do stuff on TikTok. But, I use social media, but I would never use it for anything serious, right? Like not only religion, but anything in general. And I think that's a general principle we should all use. Is Instagram is great to share pictures of your walk on the beach or mountains, right? As I like to do on my Instagram feed. But I would never take my religion from Instagram, right? Twitter is great to read about news in 100 and whatever characters. If you see quote, even from a Maulana with the turban on, black or white. It's a nice quote, but unless you know the person like, personally, don't follow it or don't listen to it, right? I would say sometimes don't read it. I tell my dad when he gets these WhatsApps, I said, Dad, just delete them. Like somebody sends him a WhatsApp, this happened in Iraq, or this happened here, or this happened there, or this hadith says this, or this person says recite this dua 23,000 times and this will happen. I'm like, Dad, just hit the delete button, right? Because we never want to take anything of value from a source which has no value. Right? If anybody here today were to be, well, you know what, if I get a brain tumor, I'm gonna go online on Instagram and see what is the how to solve a brain tumor. Right? I've been diagnosed with cancer, I'm gonna look on Twitter or TikTok for a cure of cancer. And we would never do that because we would go to an expert. We would go to the physical office of a doctor, and we would get get our prognosis done, we get the CAT scan, we get whatever has to be done. The doctor, the medical expert, right? We do that with everything, even as something as simple as fixing our car, right? We won't just open up the engine and start taking things apart, right? Even if unless I find a video on YouTube where I have to fix something simple, like put in a new air filter or a new cabin filter or put some, antifreeze, I'll do that, right? But if it comes to like changing my brakes or doing something massive, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna go to the expert, the mechanic. I'll pay him to do the job because I know I'm gonna mess it up probably and end up spending much more money to fix my car. Right? So we don't do that in any field of life, right? I'm not gonna go to any other advice online. So I would definitely advise all of you is that, yeah, use Instagram, it's not a problem, right? As long as you're doing it for the right reasons. Facebook, TikTok, whatever, as long as you're doing the halal on it, but never take religious advice. Unless it's a scholar that like this person, you trust them, and they've never provided quotes, and there's a reference there, but you know that person where it's coming from, then I would say, okay, then at that level, I'll take it. But if it's just some random person who just puts a hadith on, and then they say this is from Imam Ali alayhi salam, right? There's so many hadith that are out there. There's that hadith that says that Imam Ali has reported to have said, be like the flower that gives fragrance even to the hand that crushes it. It's a beautiful saying, but I haven't found the Arabic and I've searched for years for it, right? And there's other hadith that even Ayatollah Shaheed Murtada Mutahari, he mentioned the hadith, he mentioned the saying that people attribute to Imam Ali. In the hadith, the saying basically said that do not raise your children as you were raised because they have been created in a time other than your time. It's a beautiful saying and it makes sense logically, but Shaheed Mutahari said this hadith doesn't exist in our source books. Right? And I have the Arabic text and I have, thanks to CDs produced in Iran from the Hawza, I have literally every single book of hadith of the Shia and Sunni. You can buy this software from Iran in Arabic. And if I search for these hadith and they don't come up, which means they don't exist in our earliest books from 1300 years ago. If they don't exist in those books, then that means they don't exist at all, right? So the moral of the story is that don't take your religion from social media, right? Unless you trust the person who's posting it, you know the person that you can, and you can, they are respectable, trustworthy scholars, right? Then okay. Ayatollah Sistani's office, Ayatollah Khamenei's office, when Marja posts something on their official social media, okay, I'll accept that, right? That's as much why he's posted it. For example, Ayatollah Sistani's office in America, based in California, they'll post on Instagram frequently, on Facebook. I'll trust them because I know the rep, and he's known in the community. You can go back and say, is this the actual fatwa? And it's there in Arabic, English, Urdu, and Farsi. You can trace it back to him. But just some random Joe who's on Instagram, no, definitely don't follow them, please. You'll end up obviously harming and doing more damage to yourself even, rather than good that hopefully that we should be able to get from this religion. It's never gonna harm us in the end.
Thank you so much, Maulana.
Thank you. Thank you. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم السلام عليكم السلام عليكم سبحان النبي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة اللهم اجعلنا من اعوانك بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة بكل الساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه الأرض أوعى وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة